I wasn't planning on reading his bio. I came across something that I thought really describes his actions. And I think when you listen to how his actions were described, it'll give you a pretty good feel for who Phil Goldberg is. And Mayor Alan Smith, you wrote these words, and with your permission, I'll go ahead and read through this. I think you hit the nail on the head, and you articulated this just tremendously, and I just want to share it. This is Alan writing about Greenleaf Medical and Philip Goldberg. I am grateful to Greenleaf Medical, and in noting the quality of character of Philip Goldberg and his management team and the respectful approach to interacting in the community, this approach will be prominent in their continued interaction with the employees and community, an important component of acceptance and success. It is my understanding that past experience with industries, potential employers, and entrepreneurs that come to communities is that they often ask or insist for incentives, for tax breaks, for infrastructure improvements, and a long list of concessions. The community needs to know, this community needs to know, that Greenleaf Medical did not ask for any breaks, any concessions, and to me this documents their values, sincerity, genuine interest, and commitment to the community. Actually, they have come in wanting to be a partner in the renewal of the Broad Top area's economic stability and success. Those were Alan's words. I thought he hit the nail on the head. Alan, thank you for sharing that. With that, please join me in welcoming the CEO of Greenleaf Medical, Mr. Philip Goldberg.
Thank you all so much for having me. It's really an honor to speak at this event. My name's Phil Goldberg, as JP mentioned, and I'm CEO of Greenleaf Medical. Greenleaf Medical is a multi-state operator of medical cannabis production and retail facilities. We currently hold licenses in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Ohio, and have applications pending in Virginia and New Jersey as well. The title of today's event is Medical Cannabis, Therapeutic Options and Business Development. Before we dive into that, let me give you a little background on myself and how I found my way into this unique industry. I'm 42 years old, and I'm married with 4 kids. I attended the University of Arizona, where I studied psychology and business administration. After graduating, I returned to Maryland to work as a counselor in group homes serving adults with mental illness. A few years later, I started an advertising agency, which I ran for 15 years before opening Greenleaf Medical in 2014. It was at University of Arizona that I had my first exposure to the therapeutic potential of medical cannabis. While living in a house just off campus, I became friends with a neighboring family, David, Elizabeth, and their infant son. Elizabeth was stricken with cancer and underwent chemotherapy. Elizabeth had a tough recovery due to lack of appetite and chronic pain. Her lack of appetite was so severe that it left her incredibly weak. David was desperate to help his wife, and after the traditional therapeutic options offered by their physicians had very limited success, he decided to try cannabis. Having never tried cannabis, David was hesitant to administer this drug, but desperate to provide his wife with relief. I witnessed firsthand the relief that Elizabeth received from cannabis and how it provided her with an appetite. Elizabeth put on weight and began to take her life back. While I registered the impact that cannabis had on Elizabeth and her disease state, I did not fully realize its therapeutic potential, and I would not realize that full potential for another 15 years. Now I'd like to briefly tell you about the science behind the plant. The cannabis plant contains small crystals, which are called trichomes. Inside these tiny crystals are even smaller sacs of oil, which contain compounds called cannabinoids. There are up to 100 cannabinoids that may be present in any strain of cannabis. The specific cannabinoids that are present are referred to as a cannabinoid profile. The cannabinoid profile changes based on the specific strain being grown. These cannabinoids interact with our body's endogenous cannabinoid system, and they activate our CB1 and CB2 receptors. Of the nearly 100 potential cannabinoids present in cannabis, THC is the only one that produces psychoactivity, a high. It is that single cannabinoid that has kept this plant in the dark for so long. Now, what do I mean when I say cannabis is a therapeutic option? Cannabis has become a new option for patients suffering from ailments for which traditional treatment approaches have either failed or the side effects are so severe that continuing on the medication is not possible. Two good examples are seizure disorders and chronic pain. Regarding childhood seizure disorders, there are three main categories of drugs used to control seizure disorders. The first group works for approximately 50% of patients and causes limited side effects. The second group controls seizures in another 10% of patients. However, the side effects are considerable. The third class of drugs has less than a 1% success rate with severe side effects, including permanent blindness. The remaining 40% of patients have what's referred to as an intractable seizure disorder. This is a life-limiting seizure disorder in which traditional therapeutic options have failed and the patients and their caregivers are told there are no other treatment options available. For these children and their parents, medical cannabis has become an alternative therapeutic option. Research shows that approximately 60% of patients with seizure disorders are able to dramatically reduce their daily seizures while improving functionality such as walking, eating, talking, and other basic functions. While seizure disorders impact a relatively small segment of the population, chronic pain has a much wider impact. The most common treatment option for chronic pain are opioids. While opioids have a high rate of success in treating chronic pain, they come with significant side effects, including addiction, respiratory, and cardiac arrest. Many good, hardworking Americans are caught up in a wave of opioid addiction that has spread across our country. As physicians desperately seek alternatives to opioids, medical cannabis has emerged as an alternative therapeutic option when opioids are contraindicated. In states with medical cannabis programs, we have seen approximately a 20% decline in opioid-related overdose deaths. While not all of that decline should be attributed to medical cannabis, we do believe it's having a significant impact that will improve over time as physicians begin recommending medical cannabis for the treatment of chronic pain. And now I'm going to briefly tell you about the story of how Greenleaf Medical came to be. For 22 years, I've been a serial entrepreneur. Not all of the companies I started turned out to be successful. However, my father taught me from a young age not to let a single failure prevent me from trying my next big idea. I was taught to expect roadblocks and to assume that with hard work, success was inevitable. I was also taught that luck is a real thing and that success often involves luck. This may sound like a strange concept. However, my parents taught me that luck is the intersection of hard work and opportunity, and that if I kept my eyes open for opportunity and was willing to work hard when it presented itself, I could create my own luck. As a result, I was always on the lookout for good opportunities. In 2014, Maryland legislators passed a law that allowed private companies to participate in their medical cannabis program. I founded Greenleaf Medical at that time and began building our business. Over the next 2 years, the state formulated their regulations. During that time, I founded the Maryland Cannabis Industry Association and began meeting with patients and their caregivers to find out exactly what they hoped to get from the medical cannabis program. I brought in experts from other states as well as legislators where medical cannabis had been legalized and had them present their findings to the Maryland legislature. In 2016, Greenleaf was awarded the #1 ranked license out of 147 applicants in Maryland. We built and staffed our facility and have an incredible operation underway. In 2017, we applied for a license in Pennsylvania, and this is where the story really gets interesting. In the world of medical cannabis, Pennsylvania is highly sought after due to its large population and the restriction on the number of licenses awarded. As a result, there was tremendous competition in all 6 regions in which licenses would be awarded. And these are competitors from all around the world coming to Pennsylvania to compete. We knew we would need a compelling application in order to be competitive. The first step was to find a community that possessed certain attributes: a large facility, a quality workforce, an open-minded community, and a community that would benefit from our presence. I began the tedious process of calling on economic development associations of boroughs throughout Pennsylvania. I called on many boroughs without success. I either could not get a call back or the community was lacking one or more of the attributes I just mentioned. On January 4th, 2017, I reached out to BCDA to inquire about facilities that may match our criteria and to ask if Bedford County was ready for medical cannabis. So on the other end of the line was Betty Slayton. Betty was energetic and excited about the potential of this new industry. She immediately sent me 2 qualifying facilities in Saxton and encouraged me to visit the area. 2 days later, I was in Saxton examining the Seton plant with the facility's current manager, Alan Mountain, along with my business development team. I immediately recognized the potential of the facility, and Alan offered to take us to see Betty, which was a 40-minute drive. And actually, he told me it was a 15-minute drive. And 40 minutes later, I wasn't sure where he was taking me. It was late in the day, and we wouldn't arrive until 6:30 on a Friday afternoon. Betty, Melanie, and Terry all stayed late to meet with my team. They told me that if we wanted to locate in Saxton, we would need the support of the community. I explained that we're a community-focused company and that we intended to support the borough and hire from within the county. Betty made introductions to several community leaders, and the following week I had meetings with Mayor Smith, Chief Taylor, and the Tussey Mountain School Board. My first stop was to Mayor Smith's office. After 30 minutes of driving through Saxton, I was able to find the senior center for my meeting with Mayor Smith. He relayed the great history of Saxton and the disappointment that the community experienced when the Seton facility closed nearly a decade earlier. He told me about the struggles the community faced with regard to funding for the schools, the fire company, and the senior center. He also let me know that he had some concern about medical cannabis and our intentions. I let Mayor Smith know that I viewed our company in a similar light to that of a pharmaceutical company. I talked about the responsibility I believe Greenleaf has to protect patients and to create revolutionary drugs. Mayor Smith recognized our intentions as well as our focus on science and community support. That meeting with Mayor Smith was the impetus for our community support plan that we formed over the next 4 weeks. During my meeting with Chief Taylor, I got a fantastic tour of the firehouse and the equipment they use. Chief Taylor explained the costs associated with operating the station and that the majority of the funds needed to operate were not provided by the state, but were instead raised through community events. My meeting with the Tussey Mountain School Board came at a tough time. The board was having a meeting with local residents concerning the closure of one of 3 elementary schools. After that meeting, I had a chance to present our case to the board. They had a lot of questions about how we would operate, our security measures, and what type of training and job opportunities their graduates could expect. The result of my trip to Saxton that day was a firm commitment from Greenleaf to financially support several areas of the community, including annual donations to the Senior Center, the Saxton Fire Company, Tussey Mountain School District, and Allegheny College. A month later, I was informed that other companies were expressing interest in purchasing the Seton facility. I knew in order to keep the dream alive, we would need to make a big investment and purchase the facility. We completed that sale and submitted our 2,800-page application to the Pennsylvania Department of Health. We were heartbroken when the awards were made and we narrowly missed the license, losing by less than 3 points on a 1,000-point scale. Our heartbreak turned to resolve as we identified errors made by the state in the scoring of our application. We filed an appeal and had our day in court. The trial lasted 8 hours and was an intense process where we delicately laid out our case while trying to maintain a positive relationship with the Department of Health, who issues the licenses. Our appeal was focused on the points we failed to receive for community impact and job creation. Betty Slayton sat through the entire hearing, providing much-needed support as well as unemployment data, as I was examined and cross-examined all day. While our court case is still pending, round 2 of licenses was issued. We reapplied and used what we had learned during the appeal to strengthen our application. On July 31st, we were awarded the #1 ranked license in the South Central region. Our $12 million construction project is now underway and will begin hiring in 90 to 120 days. Initially, we anticipate hiring 10 employees, which will train as managers at our Frederick, Maryland location, which is about 100 miles south of Saxton. We'll then move those managers back to the Saxton facility when we're ready to open. The remaining employees, which we anticipate will be approximately 80 to 90 additional employees, will be hired 30 days prior to opening. We anticipate that will occur in the first quarter of 2019 at the latest, we hope. I'm committed to being a productive, responsible member of the community, reviving the underlying sense of pride I see throughout the county. I'm going to end this with a quick story about the trip I made to Saxton, which illustrates some of what I believe is special about Saxton and Bedford County. When I arrived to meet with Mayor Smith, I could not find the senior center. I drove around lost for 30 minutes, which I know is hard to believe because there's not many roads to go down. But the entrance to that senior center is really tucked down a very narrow side street. I pulled over, I believe it was on 10th Street, to try to get my bearings, and my economic development team was walking around the street with me trying to figure out where the heck we were. And a gentleman came out of his house. He noticed that we were lost, and he offered to help us. And, you know, he was holding a plate in one hand and eating a sandwich in the other. He didn't even stop. He didn't even put down his food. He didn't even stop. He just came right out when he saw somebody in need. And I know it sounds funny, and I wasn't going to say that because I didn't want to take away from, his good intentions. But it just says something to me that he didn't even stop what he was doing, and he came out to offer his help. At the same time, another lady had pulled over her car on the side of the road and offered to walk our team to the senior center. This is a unique community of caring people that look out for each other. And quite frankly, where I live, people are not as fast or as willing to help strangers. And that interaction told me a lot about the community and really helped solidify that we were in the right place. With that, I thank you all for listening, and I'll open up to any questions if anybody has questions.
Talk about how people can apply for a job. That's the question.
Sure. So we have been getting a lot of requests from the community, and I know that a lot of the community leaders are getting the same requests. The best thing that people can do is send an email to saxton@gleaf.com, including their contact information and any resume they might have. One thing to note is that we do drug test all of our employees. We do submit state and federal background checks on everybody, and you have to have a clean record. And so that's important to us. Employees do not need any prior training in cultivation, agricultural techniques. There may be, an incentive if you do have that, but you certainly don't need it. We really prefer to train people on our own methodology for cultivation.
Are you currently doing anything right now at the Seton plant as far as preparing the building for?
Sure. So we started out with demo, as most construction projects start. Right now, we're pretty far through the demo. We've demoed the office spaces. We've demoed a good bit in the warehouse, which includes all kinds of conduit and piping hanging from the ceiling, a lot of old HVAC and ductwork that we're removing right now. Just yesterday, Alan and I were walking the floor and watching them saw cut, which is nice to see some progress. We have a framing permit in. We are, fingers crossed, going to get that framing permit back today, and then we'll be able to begin that process. I love to see the framing go up. It really gives me a sense of how the facility is laid out, and it's just great to see the progress. Sure.
Can you work with the state legislators on some of the regulations around medical marijuana?
Yes, so we submit comments whenever we can about the regulations. A lot of it has to do with barriers to entry in the market for patients. I was just making remarks at the table over here that one of the reasons Pennsylvania is so attractive is because they limited the barriers for patients to get access to the program. When you look at a state like Illinois, for example, they required all of their patients to get fingerprinted and go through a background check that would take 8 to 10 weeks. That discouraged a lot of patients, and as a result, after a year and a half, they only had about 6,000 patients that had registered. In Pennsylvania, the patient count is increasing rapidly. It's even surpassed Maryland, which has half the population, but got started a little over a year earlier. So we lobby and communicate with legislators about those kind of issues, increasing the list of ailments that can be treated and physicians can recommend medical cannabis for. seizure disorders, chronic pain, MS, all kinds of ailments.
Once you get up and running, do you see additional opportunities for growth for your company in the area?
Oh, definitely. Right now, let me break that down for you. We have, if anyone's familiar with the Seton facility, it's really two massive buildings with a corridor that connects them. We are starting out in the smaller of those two sections. It's about 90,000 square feet. And so we're building out that full 90,000 square feet. And then we'll have an additional approximately 180,000 square feet to expand into. One of the things that was so attractive about the Seton facility is that it sits on 32 acres. And so we have lots of room outside of the building to expand in the future. We actually have the ability to put up 1 million square feet. And as Alan was mentioning to me yesterday as we walked the facility, we could really do 2 tiers in the second phase of the building where we have a high ceiling height. So we really look forward to that expansion, because one of the things that ensures your success is having the lowest possible price points. And the way to get low price points is to select the correct equipment and energy suppliers and have great management teams in place, but also scalability. So the larger you scale, as is with a lot of agricultural projects, the larger you scale, the lower your inputs are. And that's something that we keep our eye on so that we can continue to grow.
Yes, I was wondering how this is currently being presented to the medical community and the physicians, and how it's being promoted. I know there have been hundreds of companies promoting, obviously, other alternatives. I was just wondering how that is being approached so that physicians could make an educated decision about an alternative choice.
Right. So I'll back up a little bit to answer that question. In Maryland, what we did is we held meetings at the Board of Pharmacy, and we brought in physicians. We targeted pain management doctors to start. And we would bring them in, and we would bring in legislators and physicians in other states that had been making recommendations that would talk about how to make recommendations, how to titrate a patient up or down on medical cannabis, what kind of drug interactions to look at. It's one of the things that's great about medical cannabis is it has few side effects and few drug interactions, but there are drug interactions. One example of that is patients undergoing chemotherapy. Chemo is recommended based on weight and metabolism, and if a patient begins using medical cannabis, that may affect both of those, and so it's important to know about potential drug interactions. But we use those opportunities to educate the physicians. There's training programs available for physicians. We send them a lot of our marketing material that includes information about how to recommend medical cannabis. It's definitely an uphill battle, and physicians, they want hard data, and one of the things that we're missing in the field of medical cannabis is hard data. There is data out there. A lot of it is international, coming out of places like Israel that have had medical cannabis programs up and running for a number of years now, and they've got real research. So more and more we're seeing the research come out. There's at least 300 approved research projects going on right now in the United States. One of the members of our board is a neurologist who treats children with intractable seizure disorders. He is one of the premier physicians in the country that's working on this. He's really an amazing guy, one of the smartest people I've ever met. And, his name is Dr. Paul Lyons. And so we work with Dr. Lyons to try to get publicity, get him in front of television and news agencies to describe how physicians can get into the program and where they can receive their training. So that's a great question, though. It's really an uphill battle. In Maryland, we already have over 1,200 physicians that have registered to be able to make recommendations, and I know that Pennsylvania is close to that same number.
Thank you.
Sure.
Can you explain how you get your financing and how people can invest in your company?
Sure. So we started out, before we ever had a license, we did a Series A raise. We wanted to show funds on our books. We raised about $1.6 million during that time. And then once we received licenses, we had additional rounds of fundraising. when we made acquisitions, when we had further build out, when we acquired licenses in other states. We're now on our fourth round of fundraising. We're closing in on $30 million raised. Our most recent round is $18 million, and we've raised 9 of it in about 6 weeks' time, which is pretty impressive considering the pool of investors we have to work with are not hedge funds. They're not large institutional investors. It's really a roadshow of individual investors, and right now we have around 150 investors in Greenleaf. In order to invest, you need to be an accredited investor, and we're able to send you all the investor documents to give you the information you need. And anyone who is interested could certainly come down and see our Frederick, Maryland facility to see what the operation looks like. I talk all day on the phone to investors, but nothing sells the operation and the investment opportunity like seeing the facility, seeing the employees working, and that's what I would recommend. Sure.
What hurdles do you foresee from a banking and regulation perspective, and what do you see coming down the road maybe in the near future?
Sure. So it's actually a common misconception that banks cannot participate in the industry. Banks can participate in the industry. The federal government has laid out the guidelines under which they would need to operate. There is a tremendous amount of due diligence, which scares off a lot of the banks. But it's one of the things that's great about the East Coast states and their medical cannabis programs. As I mentioned earlier, we have a 2,800-page application. We submit tax returns for 5 years. We submit all kinds of background checks, et cetera. So the process of doing due diligence is actually rather easy because we have everything compiled already, ready to go for the banks. In Maryland, we're working with a bank, one of 4 banks that's taking the business. These are not Wells Fargo and Bank of America. They're smaller community banks. And I would estimate right now that approximately 75% of all of our transactions are just interbank. We never see the cash. The other remaining 25% are done in cash, and we drop that cash off immediately at the bank. And so we see the same thing developing in Pennsylvania, and we're aware of banks in most of the other states that are taking business. Good question. Anyone else?
I'm curious about your operational costs, obviously labor and fixed assets, utilities. Anything interesting around, surprising about?
I guess not necessarily surprising, but a little alarming is our utility bills. So in Maryland, we operate in 1/4 of the space that we're building out here. In that quarter, of cultivation space, in the last 7 months that we've been operating there, we've generated about $5.6 million in revenue, and our utility cost on that every month is around $40,000 of electric just for that phase. So you can imagine here with 4 times the cost, we'll probably have $150,000, $160,000 utility bill. So that's causes a small heart attack every month when that comes in the mail. Employee costs are high, labor is high. One of the great things about operating this business is that our source material regenerates itself. So the way it works is we have a vegetation propagation room where we keep mother plants. These are much bigger plants that never flower. They never produce the buds and the trichomes that I described earlier. And we cut clones off those plants. And so essentially the source material has no cost to us. Now we use grow blocks, we use drip lines, we have a lot of other things, supplies and materials that we need to replenish every month. And there's a considerable cost there. But the plant material itself regenerates. And watching the process of cutting a clone off a mother plant and watching it root is pretty remarkable, actually. Shows you kind of the miracle of nature happening right before your eyes. And so, for us, utility and labor is the highest cost. Of course, license fees are right up there as well. We've already paid our $200,000 annual license fee to the state of Pennsylvania. Maryland is about $165,000. And right now there isn't an extreme tax infrastructure in place. And I think that will change. We will see that coming down the road when the states realize, wait a second, there are $500 million transacting through here and we're not getting a bigger piece of it. So I anticipate some kind of excise tax coming down the road.
Do you foresee this industry having the same impact in Pennsylvania that it had in Colorado?
I would say I hope not, and I'll explain why. In my opinion, Colorado, they were the pioneer, and they helped a lot of other states realize that when they legalized cannabis for medical use, the sky wasn't going to fall. However, one of the mistakes I believe they made is that they had unlimited licenses available. First of all, from a business owner's perspective, that's not good because you have so much supply coming into the market. With all that supply, your prices drop. It's just simple supply and demand. And so Colorado, I think they did it wrong by issuing so many licenses. To put some numbers to it, Maryland issued 15 grow licenses. Colorado has over 1,500 grow licenses. Much harder to manage. I talk to growers out there who say, the state inspectors have never come by my facility in 3 years. They don't know what they're doing out there. They don't know what chemicals they might be using, on their plants. For us, we have no pesticides, no fungicide. It's one of the reasons a lot of people might say, why are you wearing those caps and gowns? What's the deal with that? You're treating these plants like they're patients in a hospital. The reason we wear those gowns and those caps is to prevent the spread of bugs and other pathogens in the facility. Whether you like it or not, you walk out to your car in the morning, you brush past a bush, you might have a small mite get on your clothes. It jumps off in our facility, hitchhikes its way in, and our facility is just the perfect environment, never changes. They can propagate, reproduce like crazy in there. And so those caps and gowns really help us mitigate the spread of pathogens. Maryland and Pennsylvania have some of the highest testing standards in the country. A good example of this is testing for molds. So we test for E. coli, salmonella, all kinds of molds. And in Colorado, the threshold for failing a test is 40,000 column-forming units of a mold in your sample, and you fail the sample. And that these are 10-pound batches, which are worth approximately $30,000 a piece. And so failing those batches is pretty upsetting. In Maryland, that same 40,000 column-forming units is 10,000 column-forming units. So Colorado has really lax regulations, and what I fear about that is that physicians and patients are going to be concerned about the quality of the product. And I think there's also concerns about product leaking into the black market. If you have 1,500 growers and the prices are dropping, some of these people are going to get desperate and they're going to look for alternative routes to put that product out to the market. And so I fear states that have unlimited license structures. Colorado's certainly done a lot to advance medical cannabis in this country, so I give them a lot of credit for that, but I do see issues with the program.
We have a lot of hippies out
Yeah, that's right. And that's one thing we see, and it's one thing that's attractive, quite frankly, as a business owner in this space, is that in Colorado, you do have a lot of that counterculture out there operating, and quite frankly, in a lot of the cases, they're less savvy operators, so it makes competing with them a little easier. But that's rapidly changing. Maryland, Pennsylvania, when you look at the owners, these are people that have operated pharmaceutical businesses. Their companies are worth $1 billion. The East Coast is incredibly difficult competition-wise. I believe Pennsylvania had roughly 180 applicants for cultivation licenses in their first round, where they issued 12 licenses, and similar numbers anyway in phase 2 of the application process. Anyone else?
If you could tell the people in the Saxon community what the ultimate goal of Greenleaf Medical is, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that our ultimate goal is to be the dominant medical cannabis production and retail outlet on the East Coast. It's one of the things that, the size of the facility and the land that it sits on makes us one of the largest potential operations on the East Coast, and quite frankly in the country. And so getting with a team like Greenleaf Medical, you're with a multi-state operator, which is a great thing. It strengthens our operation and ensures our longevity. And, you know, it's a chance to be with a team that we believe is going to be the dominant force in medical cannabis moving forward. Transportation. We have security guards that do our transportation. We track the guards, their vehicles using GPS. We track all of the packages that are going out using GPS. And we have sales agents that actually are calling on the retail outlets and getting orders in place, et cetera. But it's the security guards making the deliveries. And of course, all of those guards undergo background checks. And we have that GPS tracking on them all the time. And so transportation is one of the reasons we love the South Central region. We can really get to the two biggest markets, kind of equidistant. And so that's important for us. It's a much bigger state than Maryland. Maryland's much easier to handle transportation. So I know we're going to have to put a lot of thought into planning that transportation piece.
Security of the facility in Saxon.
Sure. Security is huge. It's one of the more heavily weighted sections of our application, which I mentioned was 2,800 pages. They're really a beast to put together. It starts with the background checks and the drug tests on the employees. Then it goes to security fencing around the property, razor wire, barbed wire fencing. Then it moves to the cameras that are monitoring the fence line, and they're monitoring all areas of the facility, all points of ingress and egress, as well as anywhere where plant material would be found. Then it moves to controlled access doors. Every employee in the facility will have a badge. That badge allows them only to access the areas of the facility that they're permitted to. So if you work in the vegetation propagation room, that's the only room that you have access to. You can't get into the shipping vault. You can't get into the other flower rooms. And so the controlled access doors, is a line of defense that we have. We also use multiple security systems. So if someone was to penetrate one of our security systems by somehow getting a hold of the security company and tricking them, they would only get so far. They would have to penetrate two of those, which would be a lot more difficult. Another thing we do is random searches of employees. It's just something we have to do. It's a little uncomfortable. We have the security guards do it. I hide up in my office when that's happening, and it's basically a quick pat down on their way out of work. Another thing we do is they all change out of their day clothes when they come in. They have a fresh set of scrubs. They go into the locker room. They change out of their day clothes. They put on the scrubs. Most cases, the scrubs don't have pockets. That helps prevent diversion. We also lecture the employees probably every other week about the importance of never stealing from the facility, even a single seed. That if they do, it is mandatory that we notify the police and have them arrested. And if they are, they'll never be able to work in the industry again. And so these are all things that play into the security of the facility, in addition to having pretty extreme vault technology, which I won't go into too much here, but the vaults are very difficult to get into.
How would you like the people in this room and the community to help you be successful?
Honestly, everyone here, so many people have already done so much to make us successful. Being available to listen to us, to help point us in the right direction, that's a big help. When it comes time for hiring, I think that one thing I'd really like to do, with your permission, Chief Taylor, is to go to the fire hall and maybe have a lunch there and bring people in and just get the word out. There's a couple of things that we believe have made us really successful. Our marketing and advertising, the high quality of our product, but really at the top of the list are the employees. Our employees in Frederick, Maryland are the best in the state of Maryland, and it's why we're so successful. They're so dedicated, they're so hardworking. We pay overtime, but people are staying regardless till the job is done. And so finding those quality employees is a really big concern because we know that most of our success is going to depend on that. So there'll be no shortage of applicants, but identifying the best applicants is really the difficult process. And saying no to the ones that aren't ideal candidates is also quite difficult because so many people want to work in the facility. So help with identifying those opportunities. As I said, we've already gotten so much help from the community. A big piece of it was in the application process, and so getting data from Southern Alleghany's workforce development. I'm not going to be able to name everybody that helped us. Betty would be able to do that, but Betty and her team were amazing, and Mayor Smith's team. I mean, it's just everyone really came together, and it was remarkable how it all came together. And I can tell you that first meeting with Mayor Smith, I wasn't sure this was going to work out. He was concerned about medical cannabis. There's a drug problem in the area. People are concerned about it. Personal Solutions is on top of it, and we don't want to take steps backwards. I completely understand that. I have 4 kids of my own. I don't want them abusing, any substances, and so I 100% recognize the concern. Ultimately, I feel like what we're doing here is creating revolutionary drugs that are going to help a lot of people. Mm-hmm.
Other questions? Thank you.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.